Lorenzo De Luca slid a diamond necklace around another woman's neck on the night of his 7th wedding anniversary while his pregnant wife sat alone in their mansion. Wearing the maternity dress he had secretly bought her, waiting for a man who was never coming home. 7 months pregnant, 7 years of loyalty, and he spent that night pouring champagne for someone else. If that had been you carrying his child, believing in his promises, what would you have done? Let's go back to the night everything changed. The dress had been hanging in Isabella Moretti's closet for 11 days. She hadn't bought it herself. That was the part that made it complicated, made it feel like something more than fabric, more than a gift. Lorenzo had ordered it through his personal assistant 3 weeks before she even showed enough to need it. Navy blue, empire waist, a thin gold ribbon beneath the bust that caught the light when she moved. He had told her once quietly over breakfast that navy was the color she'd worn the first night he ever saw her at a dinner party in a brownstone on the Upper East Side 16 years ago. She had forgotten that. He remembered. That was the version of Lorenzo she had loved so completely it sometimes frightened her. The man who remembered the small things, the man who, under all the armor the world required of him, kept a private record of moments that mattered only to the two of them. She put the dress on at 6 o'clock. The mansion was too quiet without staff. She had sent them home early because she wanted the evening to feel personal, not like a catered event. She'd cooked herself, which was ambitious given that her back ached most afternoons now, and standing at the stove for more than 20 minutes made her ankles swell. But she had made his mother's osso buco recipe, the one she'd written out by hand in a notebook when his mother was still alive. And she had set the table in the formal dining room with the good china they almost never used. Candles, wine for him, sparkling water with lemon for her. A small gift box wrapped in dark green paper sitting beside his plate. 7 years. She stood at the window and watched the evening light change over the city and placed one hand flat against the side of her stomach where the baby had been kicking all afternoon. Restless, active, apparently as impatient as his father. She had started calling the baby he privately, not because they knew, but because the way he moved felt assertive, deliberate. Her phone buzzed at 6:43. She knew before she picked it up. Running late. Crisis with the Fontana situation. Don't wait up. 5 words. A period at the end, which Lorenzo never used in text. He was a man who wrote in fragments, half sentences, as though punctuation cost money. The period felt wrong. It felt like a door being formally closed. Isabella set the phone face down on the counter. She stood there for a moment, just stood there, hands braced against the marble, and breathed slowly the way her OBGYN had taught her. The way you breathe when something is pressing against your chest and you need to decide whether it's panic or something quieter and more permanent. The candles were still burning. The osso buco was still warm. She picked her phone back up and typed, "How long?" The 3 dots disappeared again. Late. Don't know yet. She put the phone in her purse. Then she put her coat on over the navy dress, the one he had chosen for her, the one that still carried the careful ghost of who he used to be. And she walked to the garage, started her car, and followed him. She told herself she wasn't suspicious. She told herself she was bringing him food because that's what you did when someone you loved was stuck managing a crisis. You showed up with food. You made it easier. You were the person who softened the edges. She had been that person for 7 years. She was good at it. But her hands were tied on the wheel, and she didn't call ahead to say she was coming. She had put a tracker on his car 14 days ago. She wasn't proud of it. She had stood in the garage at 2 in the morning, still in her pajamas, stomach round and heavy, crouching down with her knees aching and her hands shaking, attaching a small magnetic device to the undercarriage of his Bentley while the night air smelled like rain coming. She had felt humiliated doing it. She had felt more humiliated by how necessary it felt. The app on her phone told her he was on 74th, moving east, not toward the Fontana warehouses, not toward any of the 3 properties the family used for sensitive meetings. East, then south, into a neighborhood that was all glass towers and rooftop terraces and doormen in wool coats. She followed the blue line on her screen. He stopped on 61st, the Ashford building. She knew it, not personally, but by reputation. New construction, 18 stories, concierge on every floor. The kind of building where people paid $3,500 a square foot to have their groceries delivered and their problems made invisible. She parked half a block away and sat in her car. She watched him walk in. Dark coat, the cashmere one she had picked out for him 2 Christmases ago. Under his arm, champagne. In his hand, roses, dark red, maybe 2 dozen, wrapped in that particular florist craft paper from the boutique on Madison that he had never once taken her to, despite walking past it constantly. And around his neck, no, in his hand, in a small black velvet bag that she recognized because she had seen its twin on their dresser, had assumed it was a gift for their anniversary, had told herself it was for her, had felt the particular warmth of a woman who still believes in her husband. He walked through the lobby without looking back. Isabella sat in her car for 4 minutes. She counted, then she got out. She was 7 months pregnant, wearing a navy dress under a winter coat with one heel that pinched slightly and a lower back that had been complaining since noon. And she walked into the Ashford building and asked the concierge which unit Mr. De Luca had gone to. The man behind the desk, young, professionally blank, started to say that he couldn't share resident information. "I'm his wife," Isabella said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. There was something in her face that made the concierge look at her for a long moment, and then look down and then quietly say, 1704. She took the elevator. She had time in that elevator to have approximately 30 different conversations with herself. The version of her that was still willing to accept an explanation. He's meeting with someone. The flowers are a gesture. The penthouse is a conference space. People do business in unusual places. This city is full of strange arrangements. The version of her that had known for months and simply hadn't been ready to stop knowing quietly. The version of her that thought about the blue ribbon on the maternity dress and felt something that had no clean name. The elevator opened on 17. She walked to 1704. She could hear faintly through the door music. Something low. Something intentional. The kind of music you put on when you want a room to feel like a beginning. She knocked. There was a pause. Longer than a pause, really. More like a held breath. And then the door opened. The woman was beautiful in the way that certain women are beautiful, in a way you can't dismiss or minimize. The way that hits you before you've decided how to feel about it. Dark hair, loose. A dress that looked like it had been put on carefully to appear carelessly worn. Her expression, when she saw Isabella, moved through surprise, and then, this was the part Isabella would think about later, at 3 a.m, replaying it. Something that looked almost like recognition, like she had been waiting for this scene for a while and had already figured out what her face should do. "I think," Isabella said, "I'd like to speak with my husband." Behind the woman, Lorenzo appeared in the doorway to what appeared to be a living room, champagne glass in hand. When he saw Isabella, the glass stopped halfway to his mouth. The color left his face. Not guilt exactly. Something beyond guilt. The particular expression of a man who has been telling himself for months that he is managing a situation, that he is in control of the variables, that nothing will happen until he is ready for it to happen, and who has just discovered that reality does not share his schedule. "Isabella, don't." She said it simply, not harshly. Simply. "I didn't come to yell." She stepped inside because no one stopped her. The apartment was stunning, of course. Floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the city that cost someone a significant amount of money each month. And she already knew, because she had spent 2 weeks learning to follow the money, that the someone was Lorenzo. 3 months of wire transfers to a management company she hadn't recognized. $22,000 a month. She had stared at those numbers for a long time before she'd understood what she was looking at. She had understood. On the kitchen island, an anniversary cake. White frosting, no writing on it, just a small scattering of edible gold. Beside it, the bottle of champagne. And on the counter near the window, the black velvet bag, open now, the diamond necklace spilling out of it like something that had been waiting to be claimed. Isabella looked at the necklace for a moment. She had seen that necklace before, 3 weeks ago, on his laptop screen. He had left the browser open. She had been reaching past him to plug in her phone charger, and she had seen the tab. A jeweler's website, a product page, an emerald-cut diamond pendant on a platinum chain. She had felt a warmth in her chest. She had thought, he's planning something for our anniversary. She had felt, for the first time in months, like they were going to be okay. She looked at the necklace on Valentina Russo's kitchen counter. Then she opened her purse. She took out the leather envelope she had carried for 3 days, the one her attorney had prepared, the one she had signed in a conference room on Thursday afternoon, while her attorney watched her carefully and asked if she was certain, and she had said yes without hesitation. Because by then, the only thing she was certain of was that certainty itself had become the only thing she had left. She set the envelope on the counter beside the anniversary cake. She spread the contents out slowly, one document at a time, not for drama, because her hands were only slightly steady and she needed the time. Photographs, bank records, copies of text messages, a summary from the private investigator she had hired 7 weeks ago, and at the bottom, the divorce papers. Already signed on her line, already notarized, waiting only for the second signature that would make Isabella Moretti a free woman. Lorenzo stared at the table. 7 years, Isabella said quietly. 7 years I stood in rooms where men twice your size were afraid of you, and I was never afraid. Not once. Because I believed the version of you that only I got to see. She paused. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. I don't know when you stopped being that man. Maybe you never were, and I just needed to believe it. But I'm done deciding which one is true. Valentina had stepped back against the far wall. She was smart enough to recognize that this moment didn't involve her. Lorenzo set his glass down. Isabella, listen. Matteo, she said. He blinked. I've decided on his name, if it's a boy. She looked down briefly at her stomach, then back at him. I want him to grow up knowing that the people who love him don't lie to him to manage him. I want that to be the standard he's raised with. She met Lorenzo's eyes. That's not something I can teach him here. The room was very quiet. Outside the windows, the city moved and blazed and demanded nothing of anyone, indifferent and enormous, the way cities always are during private devastation. Lorenzo looked at the papers. He looked at Isabella. He looked at Valentina. And Isabella watched something happen in his face that she had not expected. Not anger, not defensiveness, not the cold calculation she had prepared herself for. Something that looked briefly like grief. The grief of a man who has just seen clearly, for the first time in months, what he has actually been doing. It didn't change anything, but she noticed it. She placed a pen on top of the papers. I've already transferred my personal assets, she said. Our son's inheritance is in a trust that neither of us can touch until he's 25. I have a house, I have a firm, I have everything I need. She pulled her coat a little tighter. All I need from you is that signature. Lorenzo picked up the pen. His hand was not steady. She noticed that too. He signed. The pen scratched across the paper in a room that smelled like champagne and flowers meant for another woman. And Isabella Moretti watched her marriage end not with screaming or violence or the grand, ugly confrontation she had spent 7 weeks preparing herself for, but with the quiet, irrevocable sound of a man writing his name on a document he could never take back. She gathered the papers. She put them back in the leather envelope. She snapped it closed. Goodbye, Lorenzo, she said. She didn't look at Valentina. She walked to the elevator and the doors closed. And she was alone with her reflection in the polished steel, and she was still wearing the navy dress, the one he had chosen, the one that meant something once, the one she was still wearing now. And she placed one hand flat on the side of her stomach, where her son was still kicking, still restless, still entirely unconcerned with the rubble of the world outside him. The elevator descended. She did not cry, not because she was strong, exactly, more because she had cried already, all of it, over 7 weeks of evidence and revelation, and the specific grief of watching a marriage die incrementally rather than all at once. And what was left was not emptiness, but something that felt cautiously and incompletely like ground, like the first solid thing she'd stood on in a long time. The lobby was warm. The doorman held the door. The night air hit her face, and it was cold and clean and smelled like rain that hadn't arrived yet. She walked to her car. She drove home. To the mansion for the last time, where her things were already packed, where a moving company was scheduled for 6 in the morning, where the nursery she had painted herself, pale sage green with small white stars along the crown molding, was the only room she found herself unable to walk into one final time. She stood in the doorway of the nursery and looked at the crib she had assembled herself because Lorenzo had been out of town and she hadn't wanted to wait, and the small bookshelf with its carefully arranged spines, and the mobile she had hung from the ceiling that played a song she couldn't remember the name of now, but that always seemed to settle the baby when she was restless and anxious and needed something to hold on to. She turned off the light. She sat on the edge of her bed, her old bed, the one she would not be taking, because she was taking almost nothing from this house that she had built into a home, because homes are not the furniture inside them. And she sat there in the dark with her hands in her lap and the leather envelope on the nightstand, and the night pressing quietly against the windows. Her phone buzzed. Lorenzo. She turned it face down. The baby kicked once, hard, a good kick, a declarative kick. Isabella laughed, a small, startled, genuine laugh, and pressed her hand against the spot. "I know," she said softly. "I know. We're okay." She lay down carefully on her side the way the doctor had instructed, and she pulled the blanket up, and she closed her eyes. She didn't sleep for a long time, but when she finally did, it was without the particular weight she had been carrying for 7 weeks. The weight of a woman who knows the truth and hasn't yet decided what to do with it. That weight was gone. What was left was lighter. What was left was hers. The moving company arrived at 5:47 in the morning, 13 minutes early, and Isabella was already standing in the kitchen with her coat on and her coffee untouched on the counter, because she hadn't trusted herself to sleep past 4. She had packed light. That had been a deliberate decision made during one of those 3 in the morning sessions where the mind becomes brutally practical out of self-preservation. She was taking her clothes, her books, the kitchen things that had been hers before the marriage. A cast-iron skillet her mother had used, a set of copper measuring cups she'd bought herself at 23. A few things that carried memory without carrying him in the memory. The rest she left. The furniture, the art, the carefully curated evidence of a life built for appearances. She left all of it. The nursery was the exception. She had 2 men carry out the crib, the bookshelf, the boxes of tiny folded clothing she'd washed and refolded 3 times in the past month. The mobile came down last. She did that herself, standing on a stool at 6 in the morning while one of the movers hovered nearby looking uncomfortable, clearly uncertain whether he was supposed to offer to help a 7-month pregnant woman unscrew a ceiling hook. "I've got it," she told him. She got it. The new house was 40 minutes north in a neighborhood where the streets were tree-lined and the sidewalks were wide, and nobody knew who Lorenzo De Luca was. Or if they did, they didn't care enough to mention it. It was smaller than the mansion by a significant amount. 4 bedrooms instead of 9. A backyard that was modest and real, rather than landscaped for effect. A kitchen that smelled like old wood and someone else's cooking oil and needed to be repainted. She had looked at it twice, and both times felt something she didn't immediately recognize, and then did. Relief. The quiet, almost embarrassing relief of a woman who had lived inside grandeur long enough to understand that grandeur had been built specifically to make her feel like she could never survive without it. She could survive without it fine. The movers were done by noon. She tipped them well, ordered a sandwich she barely ate, and spent the afternoon setting up the nursery in the room next to the master. The one with the east-facing window that caught the morning light at an angle that would, in a few weeks, fall directly across the crib in a way that felt deliberate. It wasn't deliberate. It was just a window. But she needed something to feel like a sign that wasn't a sign. That was just a window doing what windows do. Her phone had rung 6 times since the previous night. 3 times Lorenzo, once an unknown number she suspected was also Lorenzo. Once her sister-in-law Camille, who wouldn't have known yet but would know soon, because information in the De Luca family moved at its own velocity. And once her attorney, Raymond Chow, who left a voicemail that said simply, "Call me when you can. There are a few things we should discuss before he gets to his legal team." She called Raymond back at 3:15 while sitting on the floor of the nursery, back against the wall, because she hadn't bought a chair for that room yet. He called Marcus Vieri. Raymond said without preamble. Raymond was 61 years old, had spent 30 years as a family attorney in New York, and did not believe in preamble. Of course he did, Isabella said. Vieri's office called mine at 9 this morning. They want to discuss the timeline of the asset transfers. Specifically, the transfers you made in the 3 weeks prior to last night. Those were my personal assets, my inheritance from my father's estate. Not marital property. I know that. I've already pulled the documentation. The issue is that Vieri is going to argue Lorenzo had no knowledge of the transfers, which is technically true. And he's going to try to frame that as a unilateral action during the marriage that Raymond? Yes, I know. We anticipated this. We did, so we handle it. A pause. Not the pause of a man who is uncertain, but the pause of a man who is deciding how much to say. Isabella, I need you to understand. Vieri is not going to fight fair. He's going to look at you and see a pregnant woman who left on an emotional night, and he's going to try to use that framing. He's going to suggest impulse. He's going to. I've been planning this for 7 weeks, she said. Her voice was flat. Every document in that envelope was prepared deliberately. I walked out of that building calmly. I drove home at the speed limit. I'm not a woman acting on impulse. Another pause. This one was different, warmer. No, Raymond said. You're really not. Set up a meeting for next week. I want everything filed before the end of the month. She hung up and sat with the phone in her lap, and the mobile above the empty crib turning very slowly in the heat from the floor vent, playing the song she still couldn't name, and she let herself be still for approximately 4 minutes before she stood up, because the floor was hard and her back had started again, and there was no use in sitting on floors when there was still work to do. Lorenzo called again at 7:30. This time she picked up. The silence on his end lasted 2 seconds. The silence of a man who had expected voicemail and suddenly found himself without a script. Isabella, he said, Lorenzo, where are you? Somewhere that isn't your business anymore. She heard him exhale, not anger. Something else. She had cataloged his sounds over 7 years, the way you catalog things you depend on. And this exhale was the one that used to mean he was tired and needed something from her, specifically. She had always responded to it. She had always given him what it was asking for. She let it sit there unanswered. I want to talk, he said. We talked last night. That wasn't. He stopped. Tried again. You didn't let me say anything. I let you say plenty. I gave you time. You signed the papers. I signed because I was. His voice tightened. Lorenzo De Luca was a man who had negotiated with people who wanted him dead. And the particular sound of him failing to find words was something Isabella had heard only a handful of times in their marriage, and it had always moved her before. I wasn't thinking straight. You've had months to think straight. 7 months, actually. She kept her voice even. Every month since you started paying for that apartment. How long have you known? He asked. Long enough. Isabella. I'm going to say this once, she said. I am not doing this on the phone. If you want to discuss something related to the divorce, call Raymond. If you want to discuss something related to our child, call Raymond, and he will give you the appropriate contact. If you want to tell me you're sorry, she paused. Her jaw tightened. Don't. Not yet. You don't get to do that yet. She hung up. She stood in the kitchen of her new house for a long moment, her hand flat on the counter, breathing carefully. Her heart was doing something irritating, not breaking exactly, more like insisting on being felt the way a bruise insists when you press it. She pressed it. She let herself feel it. Then she made tea, which was something she could control. And she sat at the kitchen table in the house that was hers alone. And she drank it in the dark because she hadn't figured out which switch controlled the overhead light yet. And that was fine, and the dark was fine, and being alone in it was fine. She had forgotten how fine alone could feel. Valentina Russo woke at 9 o'clock the next morning in sheets that smelled like the previous night's mistake. Not the champagne, not even Lorenzo. The mistake of having let herself believe, after all this time, that things were simpler than they were. She had been 12 years old when her family and the Russo extended circle had first crossed paths with the De Lucas. Not in any way she'd been aware of at the time. Just the overlapping social geometry of families who moved in similar neighborhoods and attended similar events. She had met Lorenzo when she was 22 at a fundraiser dinner that she could no longer remember the cause of, and he had been 26 and already carrying the particular kind of authority that certain men carry before they fully decided what to do with it. Not arrogance, something more complicated. The confidence of a man who knows what he's walking into and is walking in anyway. She had loved him. She wanted that on record, even if only in the private court of her own thoughts. She had genuinely loved him in the way you love someone when you're 22 and you don't yet know how to protect yourself from the full intensity of another person. He had chosen Isabella. Valentina had spent 8 years with that, not bitterly. Or maybe bitterly, in the way you can be bitter at 3 in the morning and perfectly functional during daylight hours. She had built a career, taken 2 significant roles at firms she respected, traveled, dated men who were fine and kind, and ultimately insufficient in ways she couldn't explain and didn't try to. And then, 18 months ago, at a dinner party in a brownstone that felt uncomfortably like the one where she'd met him the first time, Lorenzo had been there, and he had been different in a way that she recognized as marital unhappiness even before he said a word, and she had known, the way you know things you've been waiting to know, that she had not actually dealt with it. She should have walked away. She was honest enough with herself to know that. Instead, she was standing in her kitchen at 9 in the morning, watching the city from the 17th floor, and replaying the look on Isabella Moretti's face when she'd walked through that door. Not the expression she had expected, not the fury or the tears, or the shattering that Valentina had privately imagined during the darker hours of the past 18 months. What she had seen instead was something that unsettled her more than anger would have. The particular calm of a woman who has already survived the worst of it. Valentina's phone was on the counter. 3 texts from Lorenzo since midnight, the most recent at 7:42. I need to handle some things. Stay close. She looked at the text for a while. She had been stay close for 18 months. She had built her life around stay close. She had turned down a position in London that she wanted badly, citing personal reasons that felt embarrassing now because stay close. She picked up the phone and typed, handle what things. The reply took 11 minutes. The situation. My attorney is involved. I need you to not contact anyone about last night. Valentina read that twice. The situation. She had been reduced to the situation. 18 months and last night, and his pregnant wife walking through her door with a leather envelope full of evidence, and she was the situation. She put the phone face down, walked to the window, and pressed her forehead against the cold glass. The city below her was enormous and completely disinterested. She stayed like that for a long time. The call that changed things came on a Thursday. Isabella was in the middle of a site meeting. Her firm, Moretti Architecture and Design, was 3 weeks from completing a residential project in Brooklyn that she had been managing through the pregnancy, with the particular stubbornness of a woman who refuses to let her body be used as a reason to disappear from her own career when her assistant Priya stepped into the doorway with the expression she reserved for things that required immediate attention. Isabella excused herself. It's your sister-in-law, Priya said quietly. She says it's urgent. Camille De Luca was 34 years old, 7 years younger than Lorenzo, and she was the one member of his family who had always seemed to see Isabella clearly, not as the Mafia boss's wife, not as a social acquisition, but as a person who happened to be married to her brother. They had a friendship that predated any of this by 4 years. Built on 2 women who both found the world Lorenzo moved in fundamentally exhausting and who had recognized in each other the fatigue of pretending otherwise. Isabella had not called Camille after that night. She hadn't known how. The architecture of loyalty in a family like the De Lucas was complicated, and she had not wanted to put Camille in a position she hadn't chosen. Camille apparently had decided for herself. Isabella found a quiet corner of the lobby and answered. He told my mother, Camille said without hello. Her voice was controlled in the way voices get when someone is controlling them very hard. Okay. He told her that you left suddenly, that you've been. His word was unstable. That the pregnancy has affected your judgment, and that he's very concerned, and he wants to resolve things as quickly as possible for the sake of the child. The cold that moved through Isabella's chest was familiar now. She had felt it so many times in the past 2 months that she had come to recognize it as the temperature of a particular kind of truth arriving. "He's already working the narrative," she said. "Isabella, my mother, believes him. She's 72 years old, and Lorenzo's been managing how she sees things for the past 10 years, and Camille stopped a breath. "I'm telling you this because you need to know what's happening on this side, and because you're my friend, and because what he did is, I can't." The control slipped for a moment, and then came back. "I can't keep saying I didn't know. I didn't know about the apartment. I swear to you I didn't know. But I knew something was wrong, and I didn't ask because I didn't want Camille." Isabella kept her voice steady. "You are not responsible for what he chose. I know that. I know," she exhaled. "But he's already talking to people. Not just the legal team. People. The kind of people he uses when he needs a version of something to become the official version." Isabella said nothing. She was looking at the scuffed tile floor of the lobby and thinking about 7 weeks of preparation and wondering if 7 weeks was enough. "He also said something else," Camille said. Her tone shifted, got quieter, more careful. "He said, and I want you to hear this exactly the way he said it, he said that he has no intention of being absent from his child's life, that he expects to be part of every decision, that he has resources she doesn't, that he has connections she doesn't, and that if she wants to do this the hard way, they can do it the hard way." The lobby was very quiet. "He said she." Isabella noted, "Not we. Not the situation, she." "He knows I'd tell you," Camille said. "I think that's why he said it in front of me. It's not a threat. It's a message." Isabella pressed the phone against her ear and breathed slowly. "Thank you," she said. "What are you going to do?" "What I've been doing," Isabella said. "Exactly what I've been doing." She went back to her site meeting, and she finished it professionally, and she shook hands, and she said the right things, and she did not betray, by a single expression, what was happening underneath. Then she called Raymond. "He's going to fight the custody arrangement," she said before Raymond could speak. "I assumed Vieri's tone this morning had shifted. He's also managing his family's perception. He told his mother I'm unstable." Raymond was quiet for a moment. "That's going to be a problem if it's documented anywhere. I need you to think carefully. Any medical appointments in the past 2 months where you expressed significant emotional distress? Anything in writing? No, I've been careful." She paused. That word felt strange. Careful. She had been so carefully careful for so long that sometimes the carefulness itself exhausted her more than the actual events. "Raymond, he's going to use the baby. He doesn't want the baby. He told Valentina he was waiting until after the birth to file, which means the child was a timeline problem to him. But he's going to use custody as leverage because it's the one thing that actually affects me. I know. So, what do? We file first," Raymond said. "We've been moving carefully because I wanted the divorce finalized before custody proceedings. But if he's already shifting strategy, file tomorrow," Isabella said. "Isabella?" "Tomorrow, Raymond." She heard him exhale, not reluctance. The exhale of a man recalibrating. "Tomorrow," he said. Lorenzo De Luca sat in the back office of a restaurant he had owned for 11 years, a place that served as both a legitimate business and a geography of privacy. The back office had been swept for surveillance equipment twice a week since 2019. The staff understood which conversations they hadn't heard, and the coffee was genuinely excellent, which Lorenzo had always found pleasantly incongruous. Across from him, Marcus Vieri. Vieri was 58, silver-haired in the way that made him look deliberate rather than aged, and he had represented the De Luca family's legal interests for over a decade. He was not warm. He was not the kind of attorney who told you what you wanted to hear. He was the kind of attorney who told you what was true and then told you what to do about it. And Lorenzo had always respected that about him to the point of sometimes finding it irritating. "She filed," Vieri said. He slid a document across the table. Lorenzo looked at the filing timestamp, 8:47 in the morning. "That's she filed at 9 in the morning," Lorenzo said. 8:47. Raymond Chow doesn't work before 10 o'clock. Raymond Chow apparently worked before 9 o'clock today. Vieri folded his hands on the table. "She's requesting primary physical custody with supervised visitation for you during the first year pending a custody evaluation." She's also filed a motion to formalize the trust arrangement for the child's inheritance and to request that no assets related to the De Luca family's business interests be used in any direct financial support of the child. Lorenzo looked at the papers. She's cutting me off from my own son, he said. She's filing for primary custody, which is frankly a reasonable position for a primary caregiver to take. The supervised visitation will be harder to make stick unless her team argues risk of harm, which I would never harm my child. I know that. Vieri's voice was patient in the specific way of a man who had said I know that to clients in worse situations. Her attorneys may argue that the environment created by your professional activities creates inherent risk. It's not a personal claim, it's a structural one. What does that mean for us? It means that if you want meaningful custody, not supervised once a week, real shared custody, you need to demonstrate stability. A clean household, reduced exposure to the activities she'll characterize as dangerous, and a domestic situation that doesn't include a girlfriend you've been publicly maintaining in a luxury apartment while your wife was pregnant. Lorenzo was quiet. Valentina, he said. Vieri looked at him. I know, Lorenzo said. He rubbed one hand over his face, a gesture that had nothing to do with performance. Just the particular motion of a man trying to physically relocate his thoughts. I know. I need to ask you something, Vieri said, and I need a completely honest answer. Go ahead. Did you intend to end the marriage before or after the child was born? The silence stretched. After, Lorenzo said. Vieri nodded slowly, not with judgment, just with the recognition of a man putting a piece in its place. And that was communicated to anyone in writing, by text, email, anything, to Valentina? I told Valentina I was going to wait until he stopped. Did she keep those messages? Lorenzo looked at the table. I don't know, he said. Vieri exhaled through his nose, a contained sound, the sound of a man adding something to a list that was getting longer. Lorenzo, if Isabella's team subpoenas Valentina's records, phone records, texts, and those messages exist, it's not illegal to discuss divorce. It is deeply problematic to have documented evidence that you plan to continue your affair through your wife's pregnancy and into the postpartum period while allowing her to prepare for a future you were already planning to dismantle. Vieri's tone didn't change. It remained exactly as level as it had been for the entire conversation, which was somehow worse than if it had risen. A family court judge is a human being. Human beings respond to the image of a man who bought his mistress an apartment and a diamond necklace while his wife painted a nursery. Lorenzo said nothing. You need to decide, Vieri said, what you actually want here. Because if you want to fight this, if you want to contest the custody arrangement and go to court and put both of your lives in front of a judge, you can. But I need you to understand what that looks like. It looks like a mafia boss fighting a pregnant architect for control of a child he didn't prioritize enough to be faithful for. And I need you to tell me if that's the narrative you want in a courtroom. Lorenzo looked at the filing on the table. He thought about Isabella in that penthouse. Not with anger anymore. Not with the defensive justification he'd been running for 2 months. He thought about the look on her face. The steadiness of her. The way she had moved through that room like a woman who had already accounted for every variable and found that she could survive all of them. He thought about the nursery she had built alone while he was somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. No, he said, his voice was flat. That's not the narrative I want. Then we negotiate, Vieri said. She won't negotiate. She will if you give her what she actually wants. Lorenzo looked up. She doesn't want money, Vieri said. She's already protected the money. She doesn't want the house. She left it. She doesn't want revenge, because if she wanted revenge, she'd have gone to the papers instead of walking into that penthouse with a leather folder and a pen. He paused. What she wants is to raise that child in peace, without interference, without the shadow of your world falling across his life. He's still my son. Then act like a father, Vieri said simply, not like a man defending territory. The silence in the back office was the particular kind of silence that arrives after a truth that has nowhere comfortable to land. Lorenzo sat in it. He thought about Valentina's texts. Somewhere on a phone he had no control over. He thought about 18 months of messages. Things he'd written in the small hours. Things that reflected a version of himself he wasn't proud of now, in the flat light of a Thursday morning, with a custody filing on the table in front of him. He thought about the anniversary cake, white frosting, gold detail. He had ordered it himself 3 weeks ago, feeling, and he would not examine this too closely, romantic, feeling like a man who was managing 2 lives and doing it gracefully, feeling like someone who had the situation controlled. He had not had the situation controlled. He had simply not yet been shown the cost. Set up a meeting with Raymond Chow, he said. Vieri's expression didn't change, but something in his posture did. The very slight adjustment of a man who has steered something away from a cliff. I'll have my office call his office this afternoon, Vieri said. And Marcus, Lorenzo looked at him. Tell him it's not a fight. Tell him I understand what she needs. Vieri looked at his client for a long moment. Do you? He asked. Lorenzo looked at the paper with the 8:47 timestamp. His son's name wasn't on it yet. The birth was still 2 months away, but the shape of his son's life was already being decided in documents and phone calls and meetings he had made necessary by choices he could not unmake. Yeah, he said quietly. I'm starting to. But Vieri's phone buzzed before either man could say anything further, and Vieri looked at the screen with an expression that shifted barely from neutral to something that was not quite concerned, but was adjacent to it. And he set the phone face down on the table and looked at Lorenzo with the measured stillness of a man, choosing his next words very carefully. There's something else, Vieri said. Something that came through this morning from a source inside the Fontana organization. Lorenzo straightened. Someone has been talking, Vieri said, about the past 18 months, about you, about decisions you made during that period, specifically 2 deals that went through channels that Fontana believes were compromised. He paused. They're saying the distraction cost them money, and they're saying it wasn't an accident. The temperature in the room didn't change, but something in Lorenzo's face did. Who's saying that? He said. That, Vieri said carefully, is what I need you to help me understand. The name that came out of Vieri's mouth was not a name Lorenzo had expected. It was not an enemy's name. It was not someone from the Fontana side, not a rival organization, not one of the dozen men Lorenzo had spent 20 years building walls against. It was a name he had heard at his own dinner table, a name that had sat across from him at holiday meals and accepted Christmas envelopes, and called him by his first name in a tone that implied affection. Dante Ricci, his wife's cousin, not by blood. By marriage, through the labyrinthine social architecture of Italian-American families in the tri-state area, where everyone was eventually connected to everyone, through someone's second marriage, or godfather, arrangement from 1987. Dante Ricci had come into the De Luca orbit through Isabella. 6 years ago, when Lorenzo had given him a position managing logistics for 2 of the legitimate businesses as a favor to Isabella, who had asked quietly and only once. Lorenzo had given Dante Ricci access because he loved his wife. The irony of that sat in his chest like something with weight. What exactly is Fontana saying? Lorenzo asked. His voice was careful, the particular carefulness of a man who has just felt the ground shift and is deciding whether to acknowledge it. Vieri had the phone in his hand now, reading. That during the period between 14 and 8 months ago, which overlaps almost exactly with the period in question, 2 shipments were rerouted, not stolen, rerouted. The distinction matters because rerouting requires inside information about timing and routes, not just opportunity. He looked up. The Fontana people lost approximately $2.3 million across the 2 incidents. They absorbed it initially because the losses were spread across different channels, and it took time to identify the pattern. And they're connecting it to me. They're connecting it to someone inside your operation. They're not saying you authorized it. They're saying someone used the distraction of your. Vieri paused, selecting his words with the care of a man handling something sharp, your personal situation to move while your attention was elsewhere. Lorenzo was very still. He thought about the past 18 months, the late nights that had nothing to do with Valentina, the phone calls he'd taken in the car, because privacy had become a habit without his noticing, the meetings he delegated because he was tired or distracted or somewhere he wasn't supposed to be, and the organization had run itself the way organizations do, when the person at the top stops watching every room. He thought about Dante Ricci's face at Christmas dinner, relaxed, eating well, laughing at the right moments. "Where is Dante now?" Lorenzo said. "We don't know," Vieri said. "His apartment has been cleared out. His phone goes to voicemail. He missed 2 scheduled check-ins with your logistics manager this week." Vieri set the phone down. "Lorenzo, he's gone." The silence in the back office of the restaurant was different now. It had weight. The weight of a man realizing that while he was busy dismantling his marriage and building a fiction around a penthouse on 61st Street, someone had been inside his house, not metaphorically, but practically, inside the structure he'd spent 20 years building, and had taken a careful, patient bite. "Who else knows about this?" Lorenzo said. "On our side, you and me. On the Fontana side, they're internal people and whoever their source is." Vieri's expression didn't change. "If Fontana decides to take this public within their world, this becomes a question of your competence, your control, your I understand what it becomes," Lorenzo said. "Then you understand that the divorce, the custody proceeding, all of it, those are the least of your problems right now." Lorenzo stood up. He moved to the window, a small, high window that looked out onto an alley, not the street. Because the back office of this restaurant had been designed by a man who understood that windows facing streets were liabilities. And he stood there with his hands in his pockets and looked at the brick wall of the building opposite. He had built something extraordinary from almost nothing. He had taken what his father left him, which was the idea of an empire more than an actual one, the blueprint without the building. And he had constructed over 20 years something that required enemies to at least pretend to respect him. He had done it through intelligence and patience and the specific kind of controlled violence that functions as communication in the world he occupied, and he had let it crack because he had been careless. Not about the business, about himself, about the private weather of his own life, which he had let go ungoverned for 18 months, while telling himself he was handling it. You can't actually manage 2 lives simultaneously. You can maintain the illusion of it for a while, but eventually one hand releases something it was holding, and you don't notice until you hear it hit the floor. "I need to talk to Isabella," he said. Vieri went very still. "Lorenzo? Not about the marriage, about Dante. She's not involved in the business, she never was. Dante came to me through her. If he's been planning something for how long?" If this was 14 months ago, Lorenzo turned from the window. His face had the expression of a man reassembling something while it was still moving. "She may know something without knowing she knows it." Something Dante said. Something she noticed. She's observant. She notices things. "You cannot contact her directly right now. Your attorneys haven't even had a first meeting yet. I'm not going to threaten her." Lorenzo's voice had an edge. Not anger at Vieri. Frustration at being misunderstood in a moment when being misunderstood was expensive. "I'm telling you that I need information, and one of the possible sources of that information is Isabella, who is also carrying my child. I have more than one reason to make sure she's not accidentally connected to something she had no hand in." Vieri looked at him for a long moment. "I'll reach out through Raymond Chow," Vieri said finally. "I'll ask for an informal conversation. No legal framing, just a courtesy exchange." "Today," Lorenzo said. "Today," Vieri said. He was already picking up his phone. Lorenzo reached for his coat. His hand, when he pulled it from his pocket, was perfectly steady. He had learned that years ago. Whatever was happening inside you kept the outside steady. You gave the room nothing to read, but inside something was moving fast. Something that felt, if you were honest enough to name it, like fear, not for himself. He'd been afraid for himself before and navigated it. This was different. This was the fear of a man who has realized that the walls he built to protect the people near him have a door he left open, and someone walked through it, and the people near him are now at risk because of his inattention. Isabella, his unborn son, both of them connected, however tangentially, to a name that was now in the ears of the Fontana organization. He walked out of the restaurant into the cold afternoon air and stood on the pavement for a moment, the city noise hitting him all at once, and he made 3 phone calls in rapid succession. His head of security, his logistics manager, and a man named Caruso who had been with the De Luca operation for 30 years, and whose particular skill set was finding people who did not want to be found. Dante Ricci, he said to Caruso. I need him located, not touched. Located. Timeline? Caruso said. Yesterday, Lorenzo said, and got in his car. Isabella was reviewing structural drawings at her firm's drafting table when Priya appeared in the doorway again, and again with the expression that meant something had arrived from a direction Isabella hadn't been watching. Raymond's online too, Priya said. He says Marcus Vieri called him. Isabella set her pencil down. She picked up the phone. Tell me. Vieri called as expected to discuss the custody filing. Standard opening position. They want to negotiate terms without proceeding to evaluation. Raymond paused, but then he said something else. He said Lorenzo has a concern, his word, regarding a third party who may have created a situation that could peripherally affect you. What third party? He didn't specify over the phone. He's asking for a meeting, not legal, informal. Just you and Lorenzo, no attorneys present. Another pause. I told him absolutely not, which is my official position. But I'm calling you because I know you, and I know you're going to want to know the details before you decide whether my official position is your position. Isabella was quiet for a moment. She was looking at the structural drawing in front of her, a load-bearing wall analysis, a question of where to put the weight so the thing doesn't collapse. And she thought that was probably the wrong thing to be looking at right now because it was too on the nose. Did he say anything about a name? She asked. No. Did he say anything about the Fontana organization? Raymond's pause was longer this time, the pause of a man recalibrating his understanding of a conversation. No, Isabella. Do you know something? She thought about Dante Ricci. She thought about Christmas dinner 14 months ago when Dante had been quieter than usual, and she had noticed and filed it, and then forgotten it, because she had been 7 weeks into discovering her husband's affair. And her available attention had been fully occupied. She thought about a phone call she had overheard 3 months ago. Not intentionally, not surveillance, just the wrong hallway at the wrong moment. Dante's voice, too low, saying a number that was too large for any conversation she should have been overhearing in the corridor of Lorenzo's business building, where she had been dropping off a document for an unrelated reason. She had noted it. She had not known what to do with it. She had been, at that point, in the middle of building her exit. Her attention had been organized around survival, around protecting herself and her son. She had not had the bandwidth to also decode the behavior of her husband's peripheral contacts. I might, she said. I need to think about what I know and what I only think I know. Isabella, Raymond's voice was careful. If there's information relevant to an active situation within Lorenzo's organization, I need you to understand that your connection to that organization, however over, makes your position complicated. My connection to that organization is over, on paper. The people in that world don't always recognize the paper. He paused again. I'm not trying to frighten you. I'm telling you to be careful about how you engage with whatever this is. I'm always careful, she said. I know. He said it with a warmth that surprised her slightly. Raymond was not typically a warm man in professional hours. But you're also 8 weeks from your due date, and careful has different stakes right now. She looked down at her stomach, the round, solid fact of her son pressing against the edge of the drafting table. Set up the meeting, she said. Isabella, not without attorneys, not informally. Tell Vieri that if Lorenzo has information relevant to my safety, or my son's safety, he can present it in a structured setting with both legal teams present. Her voice was even. I'm not meeting my husband alone in a room, but I'm also not ignoring a warning, if that's what this is. Raymond exhaled. I'll call Vieri back. She hung up and sat very still for a moment. Then she called Camille. Camille answered on the second ring. Dante Ricci, Isabella said without preamble. When did you last see him? The silence on Camille's end was 3 seconds long, which was in a normal conversation not significant. In this conversation, it was enough. Camille, at Christmas, Camille said. Why? He's missing. Lorenzo's people can't locate him. Isabella kept her voice level. I need to know, did you ever hear anything? Anything about Dante that felt off? Isabella, I don't. I stay out of I know you stay out of it. I stayed out of it, too. I'm asking anyway. Another pause, this one longer. Isabella waited because she had learned a long time ago that the most effective thing you can do in a silence is simply not fill it. There was something, Camille said finally. Her voice dropped. A few months ago, maybe 6, I overheard Lorenzo and Dante having a conversation that it stopped when I walked in. That's normal, right? Conversations stop when people walk in. But the way they stopped, the way Dante looked at me. She paused. He wasn't scared. I was assessing, like I was a variable he was accounting for. Did you tell Lorenzo? No, I didn't know what I'd even say. Your wife's cousin looked at me weird. You can't build a case on that. No, Isabella agreed. You can't. She sat with the information for a moment. A man who looked at Camille like a variable, who had gone quiet at Christmas, who was now absent. His apartment cleared, his phone dead, $2.3 million of someone else's money somewhere it shouldn't be. She thought about who had introduced Dante Ricci to the De Luca orbit. Her. She had asked Lorenzo for the favor. She had vouched for him. Not in the sense of a formal endorsement, not knowing what the position actually entailed in its full complexity, but she had asked and Lorenzo had said yes because she asked. The cold that moved through her was not the same cold she had felt in the penthouse. That cold had been clean. The cold of an ending, which is sharp and clear even when it hurts. This cold was murkier. This was the cold of discovering that a chapter you thought was behind you has loose threads and someone has been pulling them, and you don't yet know how far back the unraveling goes. Camille, she said quietly, don't talk to anyone about this conversation. Isabella, I mean it. Not Lorenzo, not your mother, not anyone. Not until I understand what's happening. You're scaring me. Good, Isabella said. Be a little scared. It makes you careful. She hung up and sat at her drafting table in the office she had built and looked at the load-bearing wall analysis and thought about the specific architecture of her life right now. The weight distribution, the points of stress, the places where something could fail. She had built an exit. She had built it carefully and well, and she was proud of it, and it was holding, but she had built it, assuming the crisis was behind her. She had packed her bags and signed her papers and walked out of the penthouse, believing that the worst was done. She had not accounted for Dante. She had not accounted for the possibility that in her 7 weeks of focused preparation, someone else had been preparing something adjacent to her life that would eventually reach through the wall she'd built and ask for something she was not prepared to give. The meeting was set for 11 o'clock on a Friday morning in Raymond Chow's conference room on the 41st floor of a building in Midtown that smelled like mahogany and settled arguments. Both legal teams, as she had insisted, Lorenzo on one side of the table with Vieri, Isabella on the other with Raymond. She wore gray. She had thought about what to wear for approximately 4 minutes, which she recognized as a tell. You only think about what to wear to a meeting when the meeting matters beyond its stated purpose. And she had settled on gray because it was professional and unremarkable and communicated nothing she didn't intend to communicate. Lorenzo looked like a man who had not slept well. She noticed this, the way she noticed everything about him now, with the particular clarity of someone who has removed the filter of love and replaced it with the sharper optic of clear sight. He was still physically imposing, still carried the room temperature gravity of a man accustomed to being the most consequential person in any space. But there were shadows under his eyes and a tightness around his jaw that she recognized as the specific tension he carried when something was threatening, something he couldn't solve with money or force. She sat down. She did not look at him longer than was necessary. Vieri opened. We appreciate the willingness to meet. I'll be direct, please, Isabella said. We have a situation within the organization that has a peripheral but potentially significant connection to Isabella's personal network. Specifically, he paused. Even Vieri, in his 61 years of controlled professional language, paused for the particular weight of what came next. We have reason to believe that Dante Ricci used his position within the De Luca operation to divert funds from a partner organization over a 14-month period. He has since disappeared. The partner organization, which I will not name in this setting, is aware and is conducting its own inquiry. Raymond looked at Isabella. She kept her face neutral. We are not suggesting. Vieri continued that Isabella had any knowledge of or involvement in Mr. Ricci's activities. We are here because his introduction to our operation came through Isabella, and because the partner organization may not make the same careful distinction we do. There are people within that organization who, when looking for a handle on this situation, may look at the path of introduction. They'll look at me, Isabella said. They may, Vieri said. She looked across the table at Lorenzo. He was looking back at her, not with the expression she would have expected, not the calculating look of a man using a crisis as leverage, not the deflection of someone managing information. He looked at her with something raw and undefended that she hadn't seen on his face in a very long time, and she recognized it despite herself, because she had seen it once before, the night his mother died, in the corridor of a hospital, when he had turned to her because there was no one else he trusted to hold the weight of it. He was afraid for her. The recognition of that moved through her, and she let it move through her, and she did not let it change anything because fear for someone and respect for someone are not the same thing, and she was done conflating them. I need to know, she said, speaking directly to Vieri, but with her eyes moving briefly to Lorenzo, whether my son and I are in any current direct danger. Not future risk, not potential, right now. We don't believe so, Vieri said, but the situation is fluid. Yes, she looked at Raymond. Raymond gave her the very slight nod of a man confirming that he is ready to follow wherever she's going. Then here is what I am prepared to offer, she said. She heard herself say it, and was faintly surprised by her own steadiness. Not because she was performing it, but because somewhere in the past 6 weeks, she had apparently become a woman for whom steadiness in crisis was just the mode of operation. I will share what I know about Dante Ricci's behavior, which is limited but possibly useful. I will do so through Raymond in writing, with no direct communication to the De Luca organization. In return, she looked at Lorenzo directly now, for the first time since she sat down. In return, I want the custody arrangement finalized on my terms, before anything I share is used in any context. I want that protection locked in before I give you anything. Lorenzo's jaw moved once, a muscle tightening and releasing. That's, Vieri began. Reasonable, Lorenzo said. Vieri looked at his client. It's reasonable, Lorenzo said again. His voice was quiet and precise. She's protecting her son. That's exactly what she should be doing. He looked at Isabella, and she looked back, and there was a moment, 2 seconds, maybe 3, that contained something very complicated. Something that neither of them had words for in a conference room in Midtown on a Friday morning with their attorneys sitting on either side of them. Give her what she's asking for. Vieri looked down at his notes. I'll have the custody terms drafted by Monday, he said. Isabella nodded. She did not say thank you. This was not a gift. This was an exchange. She understood the difference. The meeting lasted another 40 minutes, covering the structural details that Raymond had been fighting for since the beginning. Primary custody confirmed, visitation schedule defined and binding, the trust arrangement formally incorporated into the divorce settlement. Vieri negotiated on the margins. Raymond held the center. Isabella sat and listened and spoke when it was necessary, and felt, with each document exchanged across that mahogany table, the slow and methodical construction of a wall between her son's life and the world that had nearly swallowed her. When it was over, Lorenzo stood. She stood too. They were 6 feet apart. The attorneys were gathering papers. Someone's phone buzzed and was ignored. Isabella, Lorenzo said. She waited. I need you to know. He stopped. Started again with the careful frustration of a man who has spent 40 years being articulate and precise in high-stakes rooms, and is finding that the words available to him right now are insufficient. Dante came to me through you. That's true. But what he did, none of that is on you, and I should have been watching more carefully. I wasn't watching. I know what I was doing instead. He looked at her steadily. That's on me, all of it. She looked at him. She thought about 7 years. She thought about the navy dress. She thought about the nursery with the pale sage walls and the small white stars along the crown molding, which she had applied herself with a foam brush and a level, taking 2 hours because she had wanted them to be straight. I know, she said simply, without heat. She picked up her coat. She walked to the door, Raymond a half step behind her, and she had almost reached it when Vieri's phone rang. The ringtone he used for his most important contacts, a specific triple ring she had heard twice in this room before during negotiations, which meant whoever was calling considered it urgent enough to bypass the standard "do not disturb" protocol. Vieri answered. His face did the thing it had done in the restaurant, the barely visible shift from neutral to adjacent to concern. "Repeat that," he said. He listened. He looked at Lorenzo, and what he said next was not the name of a Fontana contact, not a legal development, not a piece of information about Dante Ricci's location. What he said was, "Valentina Russo has been contacted by someone claiming to represent the partner organization. They want a meeting tonight." The room went entirely still. Isabella turned around slowly. Lorenzo was on his feet. "They found her," he said. His voice had changed completely, stripped of everything except the operational focus of a man who has just understood that the threat he has been tracking has moved faster than he anticipated and is now at a door he cannot reach in time by any conventional method. Isabella stood at the threshold of the conference room and felt the cold arrive again. Different from before, different from the penthouse, different from the phone call with Camille. This cold had a specific temperature, the temperature of something that has been moving beneath the surface of everything for months and has just broken through. Valentina Russo was not her responsibility. She had made peace with that. She held no warmth for the woman and no malice either, just the blank neutrality of someone who has removed a source of pain from the center of her life. But Valentina knew things, 14 months of things documented in texts and calls and conversations that now existed somewhere in the custody of a woman who had no legal team, no protection, and no reason to trust anyone in the De Luca orbit. And if the Fontana organization got to Valentina first, what Valentina knew would become a weapon pointed in whatever direction served the people holding it, which would not be a direction that served Isabella or her son or anyone she needed to keep safe. "Where is she now?" Isabella heard herself say. Lorenzo looked at her. "I don't know," he said. "She hasn't been answering my." "Then you need to find her," Isabella said, her voice quieter and more certain than she expected, "before they do. Because whatever she knows and whatever she says about how she knows, it is going to land somewhere, and I need to know exactly where it lands before it." Isabella finished the sentence in her own head because the room didn't need to hear the rest of it, "before it lands on us." Raymond's hand was on her elbow, a light touch, the touch of a man who had been in enough rooms where things changed direction without warning to recognize one. "Isabella, we should step out." "No." She said it without moving. Her eyes were on Lorenzo. "Where's your security team right now?" Lorenzo was already on his phone. He held up one finger, not dismissively, operationally, and spoke in a low, rapid exchange that she couldn't fully hear and didn't need to. She watched his face instead. She had spent 7 years learning to read him, in the moments when he thought no one was watching, and what she read now was the cold, focused velocity of a man who has shifted entirely out of the personal and into the tactical. He hung up. "2 of my people are 3 blocks from her building. They can be at her door in 4 minutes. Does she know they're coming?" "She won't open the door for them." His jaw tightened. "She doesn't trust my people right now. I told her to stay put 3 days ago, and we haven't spoken since the night you," he stopped. "Reorganized, since the conference room. She's been avoiding my calls. Can you blame her?" Isabella said. He looked at her. "Call her yourself," Isabella said. "Right now, in this room. Put it on speaker." Vieri made a sound that was not quite a protest. Raymond made a different sound that was not quite agreement. Both men understood they were no longer running this conversation. Lorenzo dialed. The phone rang 4 times. 5. The particular agony of a phone ringing in a room while everyone waits, and the city outside the 41st floor windows moves without knowing or caring. "What?" Valentina's voice, when it came, was clipped and tight and contained the specific vibration of someone who has been sitting with adrenaline for long enough that it has started to calcify. "Listen to me," Lorenzo said. "Don't hang up. Have you been contacted by anyone in the past 24 hours asking for a meeting? A beat. Who told you that?" "Valentina." "Who told you that, Lorenzo?" "Because the only people who knew about that contact were, it doesn't matter how I know." I need you to tell me where you are right now. Another beat. Longer. Isabella could hear the quality of the silence on the other end, and it was the silence of a woman in a space that felt less safe than it had an hour ago. I'm at my office, Valentina said. I came in because I didn't want to be at the apartment. I thought she stopped. I thought a public place was safer. Your office building has a lobby with 2 exits, Lorenzo said. Take the service exit on the 47th Street side. There will be a gray sedan out. I'm not getting in a car with your people. Valentina. I don't trust your people right now. I don't, Lorenzo. Someone called me and they knew things. They knew things about us that I have not told anyone except. Her voice broke slightly and then came back harder. I need to know what's happening. Lorenzo looked at Isabella. Isabella looked at the phone on the conference table. She did not know why she said what she said next. She could not have explained it cleanly. Not then, not later, when she tried to reconstruct the logic of it. Maybe it was the specific timbre of Valentina's voice, which was the voice of a woman who was frightened and alone and had no one in her corner, which was a feeling Isabella knew in a way that bypassed any more complicated emotion. Maybe it was the calculation, cold, pure, architectural, that an unprotected Valentina was a risk that had a direct line to her son's safety, and the fastest way to secure that risk was to be the one holding it. Maybe she was just tired of being passive in a situation that kept moving toward her. Valentina, she said. The silence from the phone was absolute. Even the ambient sound of Valentina's office disappeared as though the air itself had gone still. It's Isabella, she said. I know this is. She stopped. Did not bother with the preamble. I need you to do exactly what Lorenzo just said. Gray sedan, 47th Street exit, and I need you to bring everything. Your phone, any documents, anything you have that's connected to the past 18 months. Don't leave anything in the office. Why, Valentina said, would I do anything you tell me? Because right now, Isabella said, I'm the only person in this equation who doesn't need anything from you except your safety. And that makes me the only one you can actually trust. The line was quiet for 5 seconds. Gray sedan, Valentina said, 47th Street. Now Isabella said. The call ended. Raymond looked at Isabella with an expression she had not seen on his face in 4 months of working together. Something that was not quite admiration, but was in the same neighborhood. I want 2 of your people in that car, Isabella said to Lorenzo, and I want a location that's not any building connected to your name. I have a not connected to your name, she repeated. He looked at her for 1 long second. Then, there's a property on 38th. It's held in a corporate name that doesn't trace back to me directly. It's been used for. He paused. It's secure. Good. She picked up her coat. Raymond, I need you to make 3 calls. First to Priya. I won't be back in the office today. Second to my security contact. I want someone at my house by 4 o'clock. Third, she paused, her hand on the coat. Third, I need you to document this meeting, everything that was said, and have it time-stamped and stored somewhere that isn't your office server. Raymond was already writing. Isabella. Lorenzo said her name like it had a question inside it that he hadn't decided to ask yet. I'm not doing this for you, she said. She didn't say it harshly. She said it the way you say something that is simply true and requires no particular emotion to carry it. I'm doing it because whatever Valentina knows could blow back on my son, and I am not letting that happen. Do you understand the difference? He held her gaze. Yes, then let's move. The property on 38th Street turned out to be the upper 2 floors of a narrow building that presented to the world as a commercial printing company, which was the most aggressively mundane cover Isabella had encountered, and which she suspected was exactly the point. The elevator opened directly into a space that was spare and clean and clearly used for exactly this kind of situation. A table, chairs, a kitchen setup, windows that looked onto an interior courtyard rather than a street. Valentina Russo arrived 11 minutes after Lorenzo's sedan retrieved her. She walked in wearing the coat she'd clearly grabbed on the way out of her office, still buttoned wrong, one side of the collar turned up, and her face had the stripped-down look of a woman who had spent the elevator ride deciding to be honest because she'd run out of other options. She saw Isabella and stopped. Isabella was standing at the kitchen counter with a glass of water she wasn't drinking, and she looked at Valentina Russo in person and in daylight, for the first time since the penthouse, and she felt not nothing. She was human, she felt something, but the something was smaller than she would have expected 8 weeks ago. It was the small, manageable feeling of looking at a woman who had made choices that hurt you, and recognizing that the hurt belonged to the past, and the present required something more useful than hurt. "Sit down," Isabella said, not unkindly. Valentina sat. Lorenzo was on the other side of the room, near the window, giving them space, because he was smart enough to know when his presence was a complication. 2 of his men were downstairs. Vieri had stayed at the law office. Raymond had gone to make his calls. It was the 3 of them, and the table, and whatever Valentina had brought in the bag, she was clutching against her side. "Tell me about the contact," Isabella said. Valentina's hands tightened on the bag strap. It was a call. No caller ID, a man, maybe 50, maybe older. He said he represented interests that had been damaged by activity connected to the De Luca organization, and that they were pursuing a full accounting, and that I was part of that accounting, because she stopped, swallowed, because I had been in a position to observe certain decisions during the period in question, and if I cooperated, they could protect me, but if I didn't cooperate. What did they say would happen if you didn't cooperate? He said my name would be submitted as a material witness to activity. I had knowledge of that, regardless of whether I actually knew anything the submission itself would create. She looked down. He said it would create an association that would be very difficult to. "They threatened to tie you to the organization," Isabella said. "Yes. And they told you what they wanted in exchange for not doing that." Valentina looked up. Her eyes moved to Lorenzo, then back to Isabella. Something in the geometry of that glance. The fact that she looked at Lorenzo for less than a second and then returned her focus to Isabella told Isabella something important about who Valentina understood to be running this conversation. "They want records," Valentina said. "Specifically text message records from the past 18 months from my phone." Her voice dropped. "My conversations with Lorenzo." The silence in the room had a specific shape. Lorenzo moved from the window. "Valentina, I know what's in them," Valentina said. Her voice was flat and controlled in the way that voices get when you have run out of the energy for shame and are left with only the facts. "I know what you said about waiting, about after the baby, about—" She stopped. Her eyes moved to Isabella's stomach and then away quickly like touching something hot. "I kept them. All of them. I didn't keep them to use against you. I kept them because She stopped again. "I kept them." "Do you still have the phone?" Isabella asked. "Yes." "Is it the original?" "Not a backup, the actual device." "Yes." I didn't sync it after the night at the apartment. I've been carrying it." She pulled it from her bag. An ordinary phone, the case slightly scuffed at the corner, looking nothing like the thing it actually was, which was the most consequential object in the room. "I didn't know what else to do with it." Isabella looked at the phone on the table. She thought about what was on it. She had a reasonable imagination of what 18 months of messages between Lorenzo and Valentina contained. The architecture of an affair is not complicated. It follows predictable geometries, promises, reassurances, plans, the particular intimacy of 2 people who believe they are building toward something. And interspersed through that, apparently, the specific messages about timing, about waiting, about after. She did not want to read those messages, not because they would destroy her. She was past the point where they could do that, but because some information is a weight you carry permanently once you've picked it up, and she was very carefully managing what she was willing to carry. "If the Fontana organization gets that phone," she said, keeping her voice level, "they will use what's on it to apply pressure, not to Lorenzo specifically. They'll use it to create leverage across anyone connected to the De Luca name, including people who had nothing to do with what Dante Ricci did." She let that sit. "Including you," she said. "Your name is on those messages too." Valentina was very still. "And including my son," Isabella said, "who is not born yet, and has already managed to be connected to more complications than any person deserves before they take their first breath." The room was quiet. Outside, the courtyard received the pale November light without comment. "What do you want me to do?" Valentina said. It was not a question with fight in it. It was the question of a woman who has reached the edge of her own map and is looking at someone else's compass. Isabella picked up the phone from the table. She turned it over in her hands once. Then she looked at Lorenzo. Your tech person, the one who handles data security. How fast can he pull a full extraction and wipe this device so that the original data is nowhere but in secure storage under attorney-client privilege? Lorenzo blinked once, the blink of a man recalibrating faster than he'd expected to need to. 2 hours? Maybe less. And the storage? Raymond's office or your attorney? Mine is more protected legally. Then it goes to Vieri's storage. Not yours, not mine. Neutral custody. She set the phone down, and Valentina retains the right to a copy of any extraction that relates specifically to her, held by an attorney of her choosing. Lorenzo looked at her. You're protecting her, he said. I'm protecting the information, Isabella said. There's a difference. The Fontana organization can't pressure someone over records that are in attorney custody in a sealed filing. They can't use what they can't get to. She looked at Valentina. And you can't be a witness to something you've legally surrendered to privileged storage. Valentina looked at the phone. And what do you want for this, she asked. Her voice was careful, the voice of someone who has learned that protection comes with price tags. Nothing, Isabella said. Valentina frowned. I want my son safe, Isabella said. That requires the situation to be contained. Containing it requires this phone to be out of reach. There's no part of that equation that requires me to want something from you personally. She paused. I'm not going to pretend we're fine. We're not fine, but we don't have to be fine for me to make a decision that protects both of us simultaneously. Adults can do that. Valentina stared at her for a long moment. Something moved across her face that Isabella deliberately did not try to identify because she was not in the business of cataloging Valentina Russo's interior life and did not intend to start. Okay, Valentina said. Lorenzo was already on his phone. The next 90 minutes moved with the particular compressed velocity of a crisis being managed by competent people who have stopped talking about what they feel and are focused entirely on what needs to happen. Lorenzo's tech contact, a man named Eddie, who arrived in a jacket that was too thin for the weather and carried a black case that he set on the table with the careful efficiency of someone who has done this before, ran the extraction in 73 minutes. Vieri appeared at the 60-minute mark and processed the storage documentation while Eddie finished. Raymond arrived shortly after and reviewed the filing before signing off. Valentina sat through all of it at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee she made herself because no one offered her one. And Isabella noted this and went to make her own tea and said nothing about it. And somewhere in the middle of that quiet, Isabella thought that in a different world, in a version of events without any of this history, she and Valentina Russo might have been the kind of women who could have a conversation worth having. That was not this world, but she noted it anyway. At 12:47, Eddie closed his case and said, "Done," and left with the efficiency of a man billing by the hour. Vieri left with the documentation. Raymond left with his copy. Lorenzo's 2 security men were still downstairs. The 3 of them were alone again in the spare room on 38th Street, and the crisis, the immediate crisis, the next 4 hours' crisis, had been handled, and what remained was the room itself and the particular quality of silence that descends after a sustained emergency when the adrenaline is still present but has nowhere specific to go. Valentina stood up. She looked at Isabella. She seemed to be deciding whether to say something, and Isabella watched the decision happen. And then Valentina said, "I'm sorry." Isabella looked at her. "I know that." Valentina's voice was careful. "I know it doesn't change anything, and I'm not asking you to accept it. She stopped. "I need to say it, even if it doesn't mean anything to you." Isabella considered for a moment. "It means something," she said. "It doesn't change anything either, but it means something." Valentina nodded. She picked up her bag. She walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the frame, not looking back, and said, "Take care of yourself, both of you." And then she left. Isabella listened to her footsteps on the stairs. Lorenzo was still in the room, at the window, same position as before, looking at the courtyard. The afternoon light was doing that thing it does in November, where it seems to be apologizing for its own brevity. He had his hands in his pockets, and his shoulders had the weight of a man who has been holding something up for a long time and is feeling it now. "Lorenzo," she said. He turned. "Dante," she said. "Your people will find him. Caruso will find him. He's never not found someone. When he does," she said, "what happens?" Lorenzo looked at her steadily. "He'll be handled. I don't want to know what that means." She picked up her coat, "But I need to know that the handling doesn't create a second problem, a visible one. Something that gives the Fontana people a reason to look this direction again. It won't. I need your word on that. I know what your word is worth in some contexts. I'm asking for it in this context." He held her gaze. "You have it." She nodded. She was putting on her coat, working the buttons, and the baby moved. A long, rolling movement, the kind that happened when he'd been still for a while, and was reminding her he existed. And she paused with her hand automatically going to the spot, and she saw Lorenzo see it, saw the unmistakable thing that happened in his face when he saw it, and she made a decision very quickly about whether to acknowledge that or move past it. "He's been active today," she said. Lorenzo's throat moved. "He kicks when I'm stressed," she said. "He's been kicking for about 3 hours. Is that normal?" "The doctor says it means he's healthy." She finished the last button. "It means his heart rate responds to mine. He can feel when something is wrong." Lorenzo looked at her hand on her stomach. "I'm going to be a different father than my father was," he said. It came out like something he'd been holding and had just decided to put down. Not for her benefit specifically, but because he was tired of the weight of it. I know you have no reason to, I know you believe that," she said. "I think you're going to have to spend a long time proving it in ways you haven't thought of yet. But I know you believe it." She pulled her coat closed. "That's enough for right now." She walked to the door. She was in the doorway when his phone rang. Not the standard ring, the specific triple tone she recognized from Vieri's phone that morning. His high alert contact. Lorenzo answered. She saw his face change, not the slow shift she had been watching all day, but something immediate and physical. The color leaving his face with the specific speed of blood redirecting away from the surface to where it's needed. "Where?" he said. She turned around. "When?" he said. He listened for 12 seconds. "Don't touch anything," he said. "I'm on my way." He hung up. He looked at Isabella in the doorway, and she looked back at him. And there was a single second in which both of them understood that the crisis they had just finished managing was not in fact finished. "They found Dante," he said. "Alive?" she said. The look on his face answered before he did. "No," he said. The word landed in the room. Isabella gripped the doorframe, not from weakness, from the physical need to have something solid to press against, while she processed what this meant. Because a missing Dante Ricci was a problem they could manage. A located Dante Ricci was leverage they could use, but a dead Dante Ricci was a message, and messages of this kind came from one place, and that place was not finished sending them. "The Fontana organization," she said. "I don't know yet." "Yes, you do." His jaw was tight. "Isabella." "If they found him before Caruso did," she said, and her voice was completely level, completely steady, which she recognized as either remarkable composure or shock in disguise, and didn't have time right now to determine which. "Then they already know everything Dante knew about the organization, and they already know everything Dante knew about how he got into the organization." She did not need to finish the sentence. She did not need to say, "and he got in through me." Lorenzo was already moving toward her. Not the movement of a man advancing, but the movement of a man trying to get between something and the person he is trying to protect. And she put her hand up, flat, not touching him but stopping him with the gesture. "Don't," she said. "I'm not going to panic. I need you to tell me exactly what your security situation looks like right now and the next 12 hours. And I need to know it's enough because I have an appointment at the hospital tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, and I am not missing that appointment." He stopped. He looked at her hand, still flat, still between them. "I will have someone outside your house tonight," he said. 2 people. "And I will have Caruso move someone to the hospital tomorrow." He paused. "Isabella, I'm sorry. I know that. Stop apologizing," she said. "Do the things instead." She pulled out her phone and called Raymond. He answered on the first ring. "Dante Ricci is dead," she said. "I need you to." "I heard," Raymond said, which meant he had his own contacts, which she had always suspected. I'm already making calls. Are you secure right now? I'm about to be, she said. She hung up. She looked at Lorenzo one more time. He was standing in the room with the weight of everything on him. The divorce, the custody papers, the dead man, the organization, the Fontana threat, the phone they just locked away, the woman who had just walked down those stairs, the woman standing in the doorway, the child neither of them had met yet. All of it stacked and pressing, and he was holding it because he had no choice. And because holding impossible weight was the skill that had built his empire, and the same skill that had quietly destroyed everything that mattered. Go, she said. Handle what you have to handle. He moved toward the door, toward her, and she stepped aside to let him pass. And as he went by her, she felt the particular proximity of a person you have loved completely and are no longer loving, and the complicated ghost of what that leaves behind. And then he was past her and on the stairs and gone. She stood alone in the spare room on 38th Street with the winter light failing in the courtyard, and her hand on her stomach where her son was still, finally still, as though he too was listening to the moment settle. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. 3 words. We know her. She stared at the screen and her heartbeat did something it had not done in weeks. Not the grief thud of personal devastation, but the sharp, urgent rhythm of we know her. 3 words. No punctuation. No follow-up. Isabella stood in that room on 38th Street and read the text 4 times, which was 3 times more than necessary because her brain already understood it on the first pass. And the subsequent readings were her body buying time to catch up. Her, not you. Not a direct threat. Not even her name. Just the pronoun. The choice of that word was deliberate. It meant the sender wanted her to understand that they were watching from a distance, that they had her in their sight without being in hers, and that the her in question was someone she cared about protecting. Camille, her mother, Priya at the office, or the most obvious her of all. Valentina, who had just walked out of this building 11 minutes ago. Isabella called Lorenzo before she'd finished the thought. He picked up on the first ring, which meant he was still in the car, still close. The unknown number text, she said. Did you get one? No. What did it say? She read it to him. The silence on his end lasted 2 seconds. Valentina, he said. That's my read. I'll reroute the sedan. She heard him speaking to his driver, low and rapid, and then back to her. Is your security at the house? Raymond is arranging it, but Lorenzo... She pressed her free hand flat against the wall. The plaster was cold. This number. Can your people trace it? Not in any time frame that matters. Then we operate on the assumption that wherever Valentina went after leaving here, she's exposed. She went back to her office building. She said she had things, too. She's not at her office, Isabella said. She wouldn't go back there. She knows the building. She knows it's the address they already called her at. She thought for 3 seconds. She went home. The apartment. The one you were paying for. A beat. She has nowhere else to go, Isabella said. Think about it. She's a woman who has been running her life around a situation that just collapsed. And the instinct when everything collapses is to go to the last place that felt like yours. It doesn't matter that it's the obvious place. Obvious places are where frightened people go. She heard Lorenzo exhale. I'm 6 minutes away from her building, he said. Go, she said, and call me when you have her. She hung up and stood in the empty room for 30 seconds, which was long enough to understand that standing in the empty room was not the thing to do. And then she walked downstairs and stood on the sidewalk in the November cold and flagged a car because she was not going home to wait, and she was not calling Raymond to be talked into caution. She went to Valentina's building. She arrived 4 minutes after Lorenzo. I was in the lobby when she walked in, and he looked at her with an expression that started as surprise and then moved, without stopping at anything in between, directly to something that was not quite relief, but was in the same vicinity. One of his men was at the elevator. Another was near the door she'd just come through. She's upstairs, he said. My man confirmed she went up 20 minutes ago. Alone, as far as we can tell. Has anyone else gone up since? He looked at the man near the elevator. One individual, the man said male, 40 to 50, dark coat. Went up 12 minutes ago, hasn't come back down. Isabella and Lorenzo looked at each other. She said, What floor is the apartment? 12, Lorenzo said. Stairs or elevator? He was already moving. They took the stairs, Isabella on the inside of the stairwell, Lorenzo one step ahead, his hand reaching back once at the third floor landing to steady her, on a step that was slightly uneven. And she took the steadying without comment, because this was not the moment to have feelings about it. Her breath was short by the sixth floor, not from fear, but from the simple physical reality of being 8 weeks from her due date and climbing 12 flights at a pace that was not what her body had been designed for at this particular stage of the proceedings. She didn't stop. She didn't ask Lorenzo to slow down. She was breathing through her teeth by the 10th floor, and she pressed one hand against the wall and kept moving. 12th floor. The corridor was carpeted and silent. 4 doors. The apartment she recognized from the night she'd first come here. And the memory of that night moved through her quickly, not painfully, just present, the way certain memories assert themselves in physical spaces. The door to 1204 was not fully closed, 1 inch of darkness showing at the frame. Lorenzo stopped. His hand went out to stop her too. She stopped. They stood in the corridor and listened, and what they heard was a voice, male, low, with the particular cadence of a man who has rehearsed what he's saying. Understand that this is not personal. It's an accounting. The organization has a deficit that needs to be addressed, and you are the most accessible address we have. If you cooperate with what I'm asking, this conversation ends, and you go back to your life. If you don't, Lorenzo looked at Isabella. She looked back. She put her hand flat on his chest, not stopping him, locating him, confirming the distance between where they were and where they needed to be. Then she pushed the door open and walked in. The man in the dark coat was standing near the window. He was maybe 50, as Valentina had described, with the kind of physical stillness that belongs to people who are professionally comfortable making other people uncomfortable. He had a phone in one hand and something else in the other that he moved into his coat pocket when the door opened, quickly and practiced. Valentina was standing against the far wall, backed up, but not cornered. She had measured the distance to the kitchen instinctively, which Isabella noticed, which meant Valentina had been calculating her options. The man in the dark coat looked at Isabella. He looked at Lorenzo. His expression did not change in any dramatic way, but something reorganized behind his eyes. The recalculation of a man who has walked into a conversation expecting to find one person and has found 3, one of whom is Lorenzo De Luca, and 2 of whom he clearly had not anticipated. "Mr. De Luca," he said, "level professional." "You have a name," Lorenzo said. "It was not a question. I represent interests you're familiar with. I ask for a name." "A beat. Graziani." Lorenzo nodded slowly. Isabella watched his face, and it was completely controlled, every variable being accounted for in real time, no expression that gave anything away. She had always understood intellectually that this was a skill. Standing in a room where it was operating at full capacity was a different experience. "Graziani," Lorenzo said, "you went after a woman who has no part in what your organization is pursuing. You sent a message to Isabella Moretti, a civilian who had no knowledge of and no involvement in any of this. And you came to this apartment, which is also not connected to anything you have a legitimate grievance about." He paused. "So either you're operating without full authorization, which means this conversation stays between us, or you are authorized, which means your principals have made a significant error in how they've chosen to apply pressure." Graziani's jaw moved. The introduction vector. The introduction vector was a social connection that was manipulated by Dante Ricci without the knowledge of anyone in this room, Lorenzo said. "Dante is dead. I assume you know that, because I assume you know everything about what happened to Dante, which means your organization already has everything Dante had, which means you don't need anything from anyone here." He let that sit. "So what is this actually about?" Graziani looked at him. He looked at Isabella. She held his gaze without moving. "The 2.3 million, he said finally. "Will be addressed," Lorenzo said, "fully, within 30 days. Your principals will have a proposal from my attorney's office by end of week." He took one step forward, just one. "What your principals will not have at any point, for any reason, is access to or leverage over either of these women. That is not a negotiating position. That is the parameter inside which all other conversations happen." The room was very quiet. Isabella was aware of her heartbeat in a way she usually wasn't. Not racing, but insistent, present. Her body reminding her that it was operating under unusual conditions and would appreciate some consideration. Graziani looked at the phone in his hand, then at Lorenzo, then once more at Isabella, with the particular assessing look of a man trying to understand a variable he hadn't expected. "Ms. Moretti," he said. She said nothing. The introduction of Dante Ricci into this organization occurred through your recommendation. Are you prepared to confirm, on record, that you had no prior knowledge of his intentions or activities? I'll say this once, Isabella said. Her voice was steady and quiet, and completely without performance. I am 7 months pregnant. I'm in the process of divorcing this man. I am a licensed architect with a firm and a client list, and a life that has nothing to do with the De Luca organization or the interests you represent. I introduced Dante Ricci to my then-husband 6 years ago as a personal favor. I had no knowledge of what he did inside the organization. I had no knowledge of the transactions you're investigating. And if your organization requires anything further from me, it will go through my attorney, Raymond Chow, whose contact information I will have sent to whatever office you work out of. She paused. One beat. Are we clear? Graziani looked at her for 4 seconds. Clear, he said. He put his phone in his pocket. He looked at Lorenzo once more, not with hostility, but with the professional acknowledgement of 2 men who have just established where the lines are. Then he walked past them both to the door and down the corridor, and they heard the stairwell door open and close. The room breathed. Valentina was still against the wall, her arms wrapped around herself, and Isabella crossed to the kitchen and filled a glass with water and brought it to her without comment. And Valentina took it and drank half of it in one go. Thank you, Valentina said. Her voice was rough. Sit down, Isabella said. Valentina sat on the edge of the sofa. Lorenzo was on his phone, brief, quiet, directing one of his men downstairs to follow Graziani at a distance and confirm he left the building without stopping. Isabella sat in the chair across from Valentina. They looked at each other. He was here when I came in, Valentina said. I don't know how he got past the lobby. He was just in the apartment, standing there like he'd been waiting a while. He probably had been, Isabella said. He said. Valentina stopped. Her hands were tight around the glass. He said they weren't going to hurt anyone, that they just needed documentation, but the way he said it, I know. Isabella said, I don't. Valentina looked down at the glass, then back up. I don't have anything left here. The phone is gone. The records are gone. I don't have. She stopped again. I've been living in this apartment for 14 months, and I don't have anything to show for it except a very comprehensive list of decisions I should not have made. Isabella said nothing. It was not the silence of someone withholding comfort. It was the silence of someone who has run out of the kind of comfort that would be honest enough to give. I'm going to leave New York, Valentina said. I was offered a position in London 8 months ago. I said no. She looked at the window. The same window where she'd stood with the champagne and the roses and the version of the future she'd been assembling. I'm going to call them tomorrow and see if the offer still stands. It probably does, Isabella said. Good people are hard to find. Something moved across Valentina's face. Not gratitude, exactly. Something more complicated than gratitude. Something that belongs to the space between women who have hurt each other through the same man and found themselves, improbably, in the same room deciding what to do with that. I'm sorry, Valentina said again. I said it before and I know it means something. Isabella said, I told you that. It still does. Lorenzo came back from across the room. He's gone. Building is clear. He looked at Valentina. You shouldn't stay here tonight. I know, Valentina said. Do you have somewhere? I'll call a friend, she said. She looked at him in the particular way of a woman who has just permanently revised her understanding of something she thought was one thing and was another. Lorenzo. She said his name like she was putting it down, carefully, deliberately, in a place she could walk away from. Take care of yourself. He nodded once. She stood up. She picked up her bag. She walked out of the apartment where she'd believed for 14 months that she was building towards something. And the door closed behind her quietly, which was the only possible way that door could have closed. Isabella looked at the apartment, the window, the kitchen island, where the anniversary cake had sat, the counter where the necklace had been. All of it stripped of its previous meaning. Just a room now. Just walls and furniture, and the particular melancholy of instances where important things happened and then didn't anymore. She stood up. "I need to go home," she said. Raymond was at her house when she arrived. He was sitting in his car at the curb, engine off, coat on, which meant he had been there for a while and had decided that waiting outside was better than the alternatives. He got out when he saw her. "Graziani," he said. "You know him." "I know of him. He operates on the edges of 3 different organizations and has spent 20 years being useful enough to keep around and disposable enough that no one claims him directly." He fell into step beside her. "He's not going to be a problem. Lorenzo made that clear. I heard." Raymond glanced at her sidelong. "How are you?" "Fine. Isabella." She stopped on the front walk. The cold air was sharp, and the tree in the front yard, a maple she had not planted but had already decided to keep, was bare and angular against the darkening sky. "I'm tired," she said. "I'm 8 weeks from having a baby, and I've spent a long time being very careful and very precise and very controlled, and I'm tired in a way that I don't fully know how to describe, except that it's the kind of tired that I think requires the crisis to actually be over before it will let me sleep properly." "Is the crisis over?" Raymond said. She thought about it honestly. "The acute part," she said. "The chronic part has a few more weeks in it at minimum. The custody papers are signed. The Fontana situation will be addressed through Lorenzo's end, and whatever it costs him, it won't cost us. Dante is gone, which is, I'm not going to pretend I feel nothing about that. He was in my house at Christmas. He ate my food. But he also made choices that put my son at risk, and I can hold both of those things without resolving them." She paused. "Valentina is leaving. It's the right decision for her. It's probably the right decision for everyone. And Lorenzo?" She looked at the maple tree. "Lorenzo," she said, "is going to spend the next several years trying to be a father to a boy. He's going to see on a schedule, in a context he didn't choose, and he's going to have to figure out who he is inside that constraint." She pulled her coat tighter. "I can't control whether he manages it. I can only control what my son sees at home." Raymond nodded. "The filing is complete. The divorce will be finalized in approximately 60 days, pending no further contestation, which Vieri has indicated Lorenzo will not pursue." "Good. The trust is locked. Your firm's accounts are separate and secure. The new house is in your name alone." He paused. "You've done everything right, Isabella. For weeks, in conditions that would have flattened most people, you did everything right." She looked at him. "Don't do that," she said. "Do what?" "Make it sound clean," she said. "It wasn't clean. There's a man dead who I put into a position that contributed to his choices, even if I didn't know I was doing it. There is a woman flying to London to rebuild a life she hollowed out over someone who wasn't going to choose her in the end. There is a man who I love genuinely and who is going to be my son's father, and who is also someone I cannot trust, and I have to live inside that complexity for the rest of my life, every time I hand my son over for a visit." She paused. "None of that is clean. I'm okay, but it's not clean." Raymond was quiet for a moment. "No," he said, "it's not clean." She went inside. Matteo De Luca was born on a Tuesday at 6:14, in the morning after 11 hours of labor, that Isabella would later describe to Camille as the most physically unglamorous experience of her life, and also the only experience she would not trade for anything that had ever happened to her. He was 7 pounds 4 ounces. He had dark hair that was slightly absurd in its fullness for a newborn, and he had Isabella's jaw, and she thought, in the first 20 minutes of looking at him, the particular quality of stillness that she had always associated with people who are more observant than they let on. Camille was in the waiting room. Priya had called in the morning and sent flowers. Raymond had sent a brief text that said, "Congratulations. Take the week," which was the most personal thing she had ever received from him. She held her son in the hospital room with the early morning light coming through the window, and she sat with the absolute physical weight of him. 7 pounds, the weight of nothing, the weight of everything. And she didn't try to organize what she felt into something coherent, because coherence was not what the moment was asking for. He opened his eyes, dark, unfocused, the way newborn eyes are, seeing light and shape rather than specifics. "Hi," she said. Her voice came out smaller than she expected. Not weak, just quiet. The way you get quiet when something doesn't need embellishment. He made a sound, not a cry, something smaller. An inventory sound, the sound of a person doing a preliminary assessment of the situation. She laughed. Surprised again, the same way she'd been surprised in the dark of the old bedroom 2 months ago. Yeah, she said, I know. A lot has happened. She had not allowed herself to think too much about this moment in advance because thinking about it had made the weeks before it feel longer, and also because she was a woman who had learned to be careful about pinning too much hope to specific future moments. Life had a way of arriving differently than anticipated, but this was exactly what she had imagined, and also nothing like it because it was real, which imagination can sketch but never fully render. Lorenzo came the next morning. She had authorized 1 visit in the hospital, a single hour structured through the custody agreement, her attorney's language around it, careful and binding. He came at 10 o'clock alone, without Vieri and without security, which she noted and which she thought was probably the right call. He stood at the door of the room for a moment before she saw him, and she watched him see the baby, Matteo, in the hospital bassinet, asleep with the profound commitment of a newborn who has decided that sleep is the primary occupation, and she watched the thing that happened in his face. It was not what she expected. She expected something manageable, something she could categorize and file. What she got instead was the unreduced and completely undefended expression of a man being leveled by something he had not prepared for, and she was the only one in the room to see it. And there was a part of her that was glad she saw it, and another part that wished she hadn't, and both parts were hers to manage. He crossed the room slowly. He stood over the bassinet. He didn't say anything for a long time. He has your nose, Lorenzo said finally. His voice was quiet and a little rough around the edges, the way voices get when they've been doing something other than talking. I know, she said. Is he healthy? Perfect, she said. The pediatrician said his lungs are exceptional. She said it like it was a personal achievement of his. She paused. He cried for 40 seconds and then stopped and just looked around. The nurse said that was unusual. Lorenzo looked at his son for another long moment. Matteo, he said, like he was trying on the sound of it. Matteo, she confirmed. It's a good name. I thought so. He straightened. He looked at Isabella, and she looked back at him. And they were in the room together, with their son between them and the morning light, and the weight of everything that had happened, and the unreasonable fact that none of it had prevented this, that this had arrived intact despite all of it. I'm going to do better, he said. I know you've heard versions of that, and I know Lorenzo, she said. He stopped. He'll tell me, she said. Eventually, he'll be old enough to tell me what kind of father you are. Until then, she looked at Matteo. Don't tell me, show him. Lorenzo was quiet. Okay, he said. He stayed for the full hour. He did not overstay. When the hours was done, he stood and he looked at his son one more time, memorizing, she thought, the specific fact of him, this early, unrepeatable version, and then he put on his coat. At the door, he stopped. He didn't turn around. The woman I was when you met me, he said, that woman deserved better from me. He paused. I don't know if it matters now, but I know it's true. He left. She sat with that for a moment. Then Matteo made his inventory sound again, the small assessing noise of a person taking stock, and she reached into the bassinet and picked him up and held him against her chest with the particular care of someone holding something that cannot be replaced. He's trying, she said quietly, to no one specific, just the room. That's not the same as right, but it's something. 6 months after Matteo was born, Isabella Moretti presented her firm's largest project at a board meeting in a glass building overlooking the East River. It was a mixed-use residential development in Brooklyn, 240 units, a community courtyard, a ground floor space designed specifically for neighborhood programming. She had worked on it through the pregnancy, through the hospital, through the first exhausting months of her son's life when sleep was theoretical, and she ran the project from her kitchen table at 5 in the morning while Matteo slept in the carrier on her chest. The board approved the project unanimously. She shook hands and collected her drawings and rode the elevator down alone, and stood on the sidewalk in the May afternoon with the sun doing something generous with the river light. and she felt the tiredness, the deep chronic structural tiredness she had described to Raymond on the front walk of her house, begin very slowly to lift. Not gone, not clean, just less present than the other things. She called Camille on the walk to her car. "Board approved," she said when Camille answered. Camille made a sound that was pure uncomplicated joy. "Isabella, 240 units, break ground in September." "I'm coming over tonight," Camille said. "I'm bringing food. Don't argue with me." "I'm not arguing," Isabella said. "Bring the lamb thing." "Obviously the lamb thing. How's Matteo?" She unlocked her car and got in and sat for a moment before starting the engine. "He laughed yesterday," she said. A real laugh, not the reflex. The real one. He was looking at the mobile in his room, and something about it struck him as funny, and he just laughed. She paused. "I didn't know what to do with myself." "What did you do?" "I sat on the floor and cried for about 4 minutes," she said. "Then I called the pediatrician to confirm that laughing at 4 months was normal, which it is, and then I made coffee and got back to work." Camille was quiet for a second. "Isabella," she said. "What? You're going to be okay." Isabella looked through the windshield at the street, at the ordinary choreography of people moving through a Tuesday afternoon in May, each of them carrying their own arrangements of history and hope and damage and intention, none of it visible from the outside, all of it present. "I know," she said, and meant it. She started the car. She drove home through streets that were hers now, past the maple tree that had started to show its spring leaves in a color she hadn't anticipated. Not the deep red of fall, but this early yellow-green, almost shy, almost tentative, the color something deciding to try again. She parked and walked to her front door and stood on the step for a moment before going in, the way she had started doing in the past few weeks. Just standing, just taking in the fact of the house, its modest frontage and its real backyard and its east-facing nursery window. Inside, her neighbor, Mrs. Park, was in the living room with Matteo, who was on his back, on the playmat regarding a plastic butterfly with the focused skepticism of a person who has not yet decided what he thinks about butterflies. "He ate well," Mrs. Park said, "took the whole bottle." "Good," Isabella said. She dropped her bag. She crouched down next to the mat. Matteo turned his head. He found her face. The particular thing that happened in his expression when he found her face, the recognition, the settling, the small body doing its full-body version of "oh, there you are," was something she did not have words for, and it stopped trying to find words for. Because it was one of those things that lives below language, in the part of you that predates the ability to name anything. She picked him up. He put his hand against her face, the flat-palmed exploratory press of a baby learning the geography of the people he trusts. "Hi," she said. He made a sound. Outside the maple tree was doing its May thing in the afternoon light, and the street was quiet, and her son's hand was warm against her face, and nothing about any of it was perfect or complete or resolved in the way that stories sometimes pretend things resolve, but it was hers, all of it. The complicated past, the ongoing negotiation of parenting a child with a man she no longer loved, the project she'd built while exhausted, the house she'd chosen carefully, the firm she'd refused to stop running, the grief she'd carried and would continue to carry at a lower register for years, the moments of unexpected grace, like a baby laughing at a mobile, all of it unresolved and imperfect and genuine, solidly hers. She held her son in the afternoon light of a house she had chosen, and she did not think about Lorenzo or Valentina in London, or Dante Ricci, whose name she had not spoken aloud in 4 months, or Graziani, or the navy dress she had donated to a thrift store in February without ceremony or sentiment. She thought about September, when ground would break on 240 units of a building she had designed where families she would never meet would make their own arrangements of love and damage and hope. She thought about the maple tree and what it would look like in fall when Matteo would be old enough to sit in the backyard and watch the leaves come down. She thought about nothing in particular, which was its own kind of luxury. The luxury of a woman who has survived the worst of something and come out the other side to find that the other side is ordinary and manageable. And sometimes, on a May afternoon with her son's hand on her face, genuinely, quietly good. Matteo turned his head toward the window. The light fell across his face the way light falls across everything, indifferently, generously, without distinction. Isabella watched him watch it, and for the first time in longer than she could accurately measure, she simply let the moment be what it was without bracing for what came next.